She mended his wounded wolf in secret. Then the Alpha King came to send her away. I had not slept in 4 months. Not truly. I would lie on the stone bench in my war room, fully armored as though sleep itself were an ambush I had to be ready for, and I would listen to the sound that came up through the floor, through 12 feet of Caldenmere granite, through the iron grates, through the thick oak beams of the wolf-holed ceiling, the low, broken sound of Verk crying. A bond wolf does not cry. That is what my father's war master had told me when I was 7 years old, standing at his knee in that same hold, watching the great gray wolves pace. They grieve, yes, they rage. But they do not make that sound, the particular hollow resonance of a creature that has given up looking for what it needs. My father's war master was wrong. I know that now. Verk had been making that sound since midsummer, and now the leaves had gone, and the first ice had come down from the Caldenmere peaks, and the sound had not stopped once. He was dying. Every healer in the kingdom had said so, each one more carefully than the last, because telling an Alpha King his bond wolf was dying was the sort of thing a man said once and remembered for the rest of his life. The wound had come in the border campaign, a rogue blade, poorly aimed, that caught Verk across the left shoulder as he ran at my side. The wound itself had closed. What had not closed was the fever beneath it, the corruption that had moved into the muscle and the deep tissue, the invisible thing that no poultice reached and no herb smoke quieted. He would let no one touch the shoulder now, not the kingdom's chief healer, not me. I could reach his flank, his great gray head. I could sit with him on the straw for hours, and he would let me. But the shoulder, the moment any hand moved toward it, he would lurch upright, and the sound he made then was not crying but warning, and even I knew better than to push past a warning from a creature that could take my arm at the shoulder without effort. So the fever sat in him, and the muscle had begun to waste, and the royal healers came every morning to measure his temperature by the warmth of his breath and go away again shaking their heads, and my court had begun the quiet, terrible work of preparing for the possibility that their king would follow his bond wolf within the year. They were not wrong to prepare. The bond between an Alpha King and his wolf is not a figure of speech. It is a genuine physiological tethering, a thing you feel in the chest, a constant low warmth like banked coals, so ordinary that you forget to notice it until the day it begins to cool. Verk's warmth had been dimming for weeks. Some mornings I would press my fist against my sternum just to confirm it was still there, that faint pulse, and the mornings it felt thinner than the day before were the mornings I sent my counsel away and sat alone in the wolf hold, until the fear receded enough that I could govern. It was on one of those mornings, a gray iron morning in late autumn, frost on the hold's great windows, the light the color of old pewter, that I noticed the straw. I had come down before dawn, as I did every day, to sit with Verk before the court woke. He was lying on his side, which was itself unusual. He had spent most of the past month in a tight, guarded curl, his weight off the bad shoulder. But that morning he was stretched out, his breathing slower and more even than I had heard in weeks. And the straw around his left shoulder, the straw that I had learned to leave undisturbed, because the slightest disturbance near that side sent him into a low warning rumble, had been rearranged. Not scattered, as it would be if he had shifted in the night. Arranged. Smoothed in a specific pattern around the shoulder, as though someone had knelt there and worked carefully, making room without startling him, tucking the straw back afterward. I stood very still. Then I crouched and looked more closely at the stone floor beyond the straw's edge. Boot prints. Small ones, lighter than a man's, pressed faintly into the thin dust that always gathered near the east wall despite the hold keeper's best efforts. They went to the shoulder side, to the one side Verk allowed no one, and they came back out again, and the trail led to the small drainage grate in the east wall that the hold keepers used to flush the floor after cleaning. Someone had come in through the drainage grate, someone small enough to fit, someone who had knelt at Verk's shoulder and done something there, something that had left him sleeping on his side, slow and even, for the first time in months. I pressed my hand to my sternum. The warmth was there. And it was, for the first time in weeks, not thinner than the day before. It was, if I was not imagining it, the smallest fraction warmer. I did not tell my council. I did not tell the hold keepers. I went back to my war room, sat down in my armor on the stone bench, and I waited. The next morning the straw was arranged again. The morning after that, I found a small clay cup near the east wall, empty, rinsed clean, left so carefully that a less careful man would have taken it for something the hold keepers had forgotten. It was not a hold keeper's cup. It was rougher than that, hand-thrown, the kind that came from a village market rather than a palace supply room. It smelled of something I could not immediately name, something green and resinous, with a faint undersmell of iron and something bright, almost citrus. I had grown up around healers. I knew the smell of a fever-reducing compound. I knew, too, that whatever was in that cup was not in any formulation my chief healer had prescribed, because my chief healer used court-ground preparations that smelled of alcohol and beeswax, not of pine resin and something foraged. Someone was treating Verk with a field preparation, a folk preparation, the kind that came from a healer who learned in the outer villages, not in a royal dispensary. And it was working. I had Verk measured that afternoon by my chief healer, who was a careful, honest man who did not inflate numbers to please me. He measured the temperature at the shoulder, pressing the back of his hand against the fur above the wound, which Verk permitted when he was calm, and he straightened up and said, very quietly, that the fever had dropped 2 degrees since the previous week. He said it as though he did not entirely believe his own assessment. He said he would remeasure tomorrow. He said nothing else. I told him to say nothing else to anyone. That night I went down to the wolf hold myself, 4 hours before dawn, and I sat in the dark in the east corner with my back against the stone wall and my knees drawn up, and I waited. She came through the drainage grate at the 3rd hour, past midnight. I heard her before I saw her, a careful scrape of boot against the grate's iron rim, a controlled breath, and then the sound of someone lowering themselves quietly onto the hold floor. She was small. In the dark I could see the shape of her, not much taller than my shoulder, moving with the particular careful but not cautious movement of someone who was used to working in low light, and had learned to be quiet not out of fear but out of professional habit, the way surgeons are quiet and the way trackers are quiet. She carried a small pack. She moved toward Verk's corner without hesitation, without testing his reaction, as though she already knew he would not object. He did not object. I watched Verk, my bondwolf, who had given the royal head healer a warning growl when the man came within 6 feet of his shoulder, lift his great head as she approached and set it back down on the straw with the small exhale that meant ease. She crouched beside him and spoke to him. I could not hear what she said. It was below the threshold of audible speech, a murmur, the kind you would use with a frightened animal or a sleeping child. She opened her pack, and I heard the careful sounds of preparation, the unstoppering of a small vessel, the soft tearing of what might have been a compressed cloth, the almost inaudible sound of her working something between her palms. Then she moved to the shoulder side. Verk did not lurch upright, he did not rumble. His breathing changed briefly, a quick tightening and then a slow release, and then he let her touch the shoulder. He let her hold the compress against the wound site for a long time, long enough that my legs went asleep against the cold stone floor, and the only sound in the wolf hold was Verk's breathing and the faint movement of her working. Once he made a sound, not the crying sound, not the warning sound, but something lower and quieter than either, something I had no name for. She answered it with the murmur. I sat there in the dark and felt something happening in my chest that was not the bond warmth exactly, but was not separate from it either, something pulling toward her. Something that had no strategic explanation and no precedent in anything I had been trained to feel, something that was simply there, insistent, the way a lodestone insists toward north. My wolf, I thought, with the detached clarity that comes just before understanding arrives. My wolf is already choosing her. My wolf has been choosing her for weeks. I stood up. She heard me, her hand stilled on Verk's shoulder, and she went motionless in the way prey goes motionless, not because she was prey but because she was thinking. Then, very slowly, she turned around. I could not see her face well in the dark, but I could see the shape of her, the careful stillness, the way she did not flinch, the way her hands did not move from Verk's shoulder even when she realized there was a very large man standing 12 feet away in the dark in full armor. "Don't move away from him," I said. "He's calm." A pause. "I know he's calm," she said. Her voice was quieter than I expected, not from fear but from the same professional quiet she had been using with Verk, measured, even. "I'll stay until the compress sets. Then I'll go." "You'll go when I say," I said, which was not the most graceful thing I had ever said. But the bond pull in my chest had knocked several of my better instincts sideways, and I was governing largely on habit. "Light the lamp." She reached into her pack and struck a small flint against a palm lamp without protest, and the hold filled with that low amber light that makes everyone look like they are in a painting, and I saw her face. She was younger than the boot's eyes had suggested to me, though not young, somewhere in the span of years that I was, perhaps a few seasons younger, perhaps the same. A strong face, not a delicate one, cheekbones cut sharp, dark eyes that were looking at me with what I identified after a moment as calm assessment rather than fear. There was a streak of herb paste on her left wrist where she had wiped her hand. She smelled of pine resin and dried bog myrtle and iron, and something underneath all of it that I had no word for, that my wolf responded to with a low, warm recognition in the base of my sternum before my mind had caught up with what my wolf already knew. "You're the king," she said. "Yes," I said. She looked at me for another moment. Then she looked back at Verk, whose eyes had opened in the lamplight and were moving between us with the careful, attentive gaze of a creature watching two things he cares about in proximity to each other for the first time. "He's been letting me touch the shoulder for 6 nights, she said, not as an excuse, not as a boast, as a report. "The inflammation is down. The fever has dropped 2 degrees at the site. I think another 10 days of the compound, and the fever will break." "My chief healer says the same," I said. "He doesn't know where the improvement is coming from." "No," she said, "he wouldn't." I looked at her. She was still crouched at Verk's shoulder, her hand still gentle on his fur, completely at ease in a way that my best-trained guards were not when I looked at them that way. "What is your name?" I said. "Senna," she said. "From Ashvin Village, Outer District. I hold no pack rank." "I know you hold no pack rank," I said, because I would have known if an Outer District healer held a rank. "How did you know about Verk?" "Everyone in the Outer Districts knows," she said. "When a bond wolf suffers, the kingdom feels it." She paused. "I heard him one night. I was in the city for a market run, staying at the lower gatekeeper's inn, and the hold is near the south gate. I heard him crying." She said it without any particular weight, as a plain statement of what had happened. "I came to see if I could help." "Through the drainage grate," I said. "I couldn't exactly walk through the main gate and ask the hold keepers to let me work on the Alpha King's bond wolf," she said. "They would have thought I was mad." "You are," I said, "a little." Something shifted in her face that might have been the beginning of a smile. "He needed someone," she said. "Your healers are competent. They're just using court formulations for a wound that needs field treatment. The bog myrtle compound pulls infection from deep tissue better than anything you'll find in a royal dispensary." She glanced down at Verk, who had closed his eyes again. "He let me in the first night. He knew what I was doing." "He knew before I did," I said. She looked up at me at that. The lamplight caught her eyes. I was standing 12 feet away from her, and the bond pull in my chest was not subtle anymore. It was present and specific, and it had a direction, the way the warmth of a fire has a direction when you're standing close enough to feel it. My wolf in the deep part of me where the bond lives had gone very still, not the feverish stillness of worry, the other stillness, the recognizing kind. I had heard the elders describe the mate recognition once, at a formal council when I was 17, and had been insufficiently interested in my own mating obligations. An old elder named Cusrath had leaned across the table and said, in the voice he used for things he considered obvious, "The recognition is not romantic, boy. It is not a pretty feeling. It is the feeling of a key turning in a lock you did not know you had." I had found this insufficiently illuminating at the time. Standing in the wolf hold at the 3rd hour past midnight, I understood exactly what Cusrath had meant. I did not say any of this to Senna. I said, "You will come to the great hall at dawn, through the front gate with an escort I will send to the inn. You will not come through the drainage grate again." She looked at me for a long moment. "To the great hall," she said, "for what purpose?" "I haven't decided yet," I said, which was the truth. She held my gaze for another moment, then nodded once, the small, precise nod of someone filing information, and turned back to Verk's shoulder to finish her work. I went back upstairs and sat in the dark in my war room and did not sleep at all. She came to the great hall at dawn as I had asked, which I had not entirely expected. She had changed from the working clothes she had worn in the wolf hold. She was in a plain gray dress now, the kind that village healers wear, practical and unadorned, with a healer's apron folded over one arm and her pack slung over the other. She had done nothing elaborate with her hair. She walked through the great hall doors with the escort I had sent and stopped in the center of the hall and looked around at the space, the carved stone columns, the high banners, the council table where 3 of my advisors were already seated and staring at her. And then she looked at me, on the dais, and waited. My counsel was watching me. Advisor Herath, who managed court appointments and was constitutionally suspicious of anything that had not come through a proper channel, already had the expression he wore when he was about to explain a policy. Lord Fenwick, who managed the border territories and had the outer district reports on his desk every morning, was looking at Senna with the dawning recognition of a man who was beginning to understand that something significant was happening and was not sure how he felt about it. My chief healer, whom I had called in from his quarters, was looking at Senna with professional curiosity and something that might have been embarrassment. "This is the healer who has been treating Verk," I said to the room. I did not elaborate on the drainage grate. "Her name is Senna of Ashfin Village. She will give her assessment to healer Voss, and then we will discuss how to proceed." Herath opened his mouth. I looked at him. He closed it. Senna walked across the hall to where healer Voss was standing and began explaining her compound in a quiet, technical voice, with the same measured precision she had used in the wolf hold. I watched Voss's face move through surprise, then consideration, then reluctant acknowledgement. After 10 minutes he was asking questions. After 20 he was writing things down. I was watching Senna. She was not performing for the room. She was not intimidated by it. She was not, as far as I could see, aware of the various social calculations that were running at high speed through every person in the great hall except herself. She was simply explaining what she knew in the way she knew it, because someone had asked her to. The wolf-hold pragmatism translated into the great hall with no translation losses. I found this, unreasonably, the most striking thing about her. I was the Alpha King of Caldenmere. I had governed since I was 19. I had sat across tables from every type of person the kingdom could produce, the brilliant ones, the devious ones, the gentle ones, the ruthless ones. I knew how people behaved in the Great Hall. People in the Great Hall were always aware that they were in the Great Hall. It changed them in small ways and large ones, the pressure of the space, the weight of the king's attention. I had learned to read those changes the way a weather reader reads cloud formations, because how a person changed under pressure told you almost everything you needed to know about who they actually were. Senna did not change. She stood in my great hall in her plain gray dress with herb paste still faintly visible on her wrist. And she was exactly the same person she had been crouching in the straw at 3 in the morning. And I felt the key turn in the lock again, harder this time, and had to make a conscious effort to keep my face arranged in the expression it was supposed to have. When she finished with Voss, she looked at me. "He'll want to try the bog myrtle compound himself," she said, with no particular judgment in it. "I can write the preparation method down." "Do that," I said. "And I should go back to the hold this afternoon," she said. "I told you 10 more days. I don't want to interrupt the course." Hareth made a small sound. I did not look at him. "Yes," I said, "you'll have proper access. I'll tell the hold keepers." She nodded. "Thank you." And then, without waiting to be dismissed, because she had not been a supplicant in the first place, I understood that now she turned to find a writing surface and began drafting the preparation method for Voss. Hareth leaned toward me from his chair. "My lord," he said, in the voice that meant he was about to say something I was not going to agree with, "she holds no rank. She has no court standing. Her presence in the Wolf Hold, unauthorized for how long?" 6 nights, I said. He absorbed this. 6 nights, unauthorized, my lord, protocol requires. "Verk is alive," I said, "and improving. Protocol can accommodate that." He was quiet for a moment. "She cannot simply come and go from the Wolf Hold as though she were." "She is not coming and going as though she were anything," I said. "She will be given a formal healer's appointment to the Wolf Hold. I will draft the writ this morning." Hareth looked at Fenwick. Fenwick, who was a sensible man, said nothing and looked out the window. I drafted the writ myself, which was unusual enough that my chief scribe appeared in the war-room doorway and stared at me. I sent him away. I wrote it plain, an appointment of healer in residence to the Caldenmere Wolf Hold, covering the duration of the bond wolf's treatment and renewable at the king's discretion. No ceremony. No rank beyond the healer's standing the writ itself would create. I sealed it and sent it to Senna through a page. She sent back a note that said, in her clean, practical handwriting, "Thank you. I'll come this afternoon." That was all. No title for me, no formality, no performance, just the information. I folded the note and put it in my armor and went back to work, and spent the next 4 hours failing to concentrate on anything. The 10 days she had promised were the strangest 10 days of my governance. I told myself I went to the Wolf Hold each afternoon for Verk's sake, which was true but not the whole truth. I sat in the east corner, where she had found me the first night, and watched her work. She had stopped being quiet around me in the cautious sense after the second day. She was still professionally quiet, but the silence between us had changed its quality, the way a room changes when a fire is lit in it, the temperature the same but the atmosphere different. She would speak to Verk, and sometimes the words would carry, and once or twice she would say something to me. A finding she thought I should know, a question about his history, something she had read in a village healer's compendium that she thought might be relevant. I answered her, and then I asked questions back. And then somehow we were talking. Not court talking, not the careful, layered exchange of information that I spent most of my waking life engaged in, where every statement had a strategic dimension, and every silence was significant. We talked the way people talk when they are both focused on something that matters more than the conversation itself, the way I had talked with my best commanders in the field when we were both watching the same ridge line. Practical, direct, with room in it for honesty. She told me about Ashfin Village, about the outer district healer circuit she ran, the 12 villages she covered on rotation, the particular difficulty of treating deep infection in communities that were 2 days' travel from the nearest royal dispensary. She told me about the compound she used on Verk, the bog myrtle component that drew infection from the tissue layers that court formulations couldn't reach, the pine resin base that carried the active elements and kept the compress adhesive without pulling at the wound site when it was removed. She explained it the way she explained everything, precisely, without condescension, as though she assumed I was intelligent enough to follow, and was simply giving me the information I needed. I told her things I did not typically tell people. I told her about the border campaign, about the rogue blade and the particular horror of watching Verk stagger, and the cold that had started in my chest in that moment, and had not entirely left since. I told her about the mornings on the stone bench, listening through the granite. I told her that the warmest point of the last 4 months had been the morning I found the rearranged straw. She was quiet for a moment after that. Then she said, "I should have found a way to tell you sooner." "I might have sent you away," I said. "Yes," she said, "that's why I didn't." I looked at her across the wolf hold, her hand still moving at Verk's shoulder, his eyes half closed in the ease that was becoming, slowly, normal again. "You knew you were taking a risk," I said. "Not of anything that mattered to me," she said. "He needed someone that mattered." There was a long silence. Verk breathed. "You're not afraid of me," I said. She considered this with the same care she gave to everything. "No," she said. "Should I be?" "Most people are," I said. "Most people don't come in through the drainage grate," she said. And there it was, the thing that might have been a smile fully present this time. It transformed her face briefly into something that was already doing something to my chest independent of the bond pull, something that I recognized, after a moment, as simple delight. I had not felt simple delight in 4 months. I had felt worry, and the management of worry, and the performance of not worry for the benefit of my counsel. I had not felt something light and direct and entirely without strategic dimension since midsummer, since before the campaign, since before the blade. She was still smiling at Verk, not at me, which was somehow better. I went back to the war room and sat on the stone bench and put my head in my hands and thought, "Kusrath, you old catastrophe, you were right." It was on the 9th day that Verk stood up. Senna had been crouching at his shoulder as usual, and I had been in my corner, and there had been a gradual stilling in the room, the particular attentive stillness that falls before something significant happens, the way air holds itself before a storm. Verk's breathing had changed. Not the tightening and release of discomfort. Something else. Something building. He put his forepaws down on the straw. He pressed up. He was slow and careful, and the bad shoulder shook slightly, but he stood. He stood on all 4 legs in the wolf hold for the first time in 4 months, and the bond warmth in my chest did not flare. It did not surge or shout. It simply expanded, the way a room expands when a window is opened, and I found that my jaw had locked and my eyes were doing something embarrassing, and I was very glad there was no one in the wolf hold but Senna and a wolf. Verk stood there for a long moment, very still, testing himself. Then he turned his head and looked at Senna. She was still crouching at his shoulder, one hand resting lightly on his fur, looking up at him with an expression I had not seen on her face before, something open and unguarded. All the professional composure set down for a moment, just genuine awe at what the creature in front of her had done. Her eyes were bright. She breathed out slowly, a sound that was almost but not quite a word. Verk stepped toward her. He pressed his great head against her chest, which knocked her slightly off balance. She steadied herself with one hand on the straw and stayed there, his eyes closed, the full weight of his head resting against her, and she brought both hands up to either side of his face and held him. The mate mark on my wrist ignited. There is no other word for it. It had been dormant since I inherited it at my first shift, a silver tracery of the bond lines on the inside of my left wrist, the mark that every alpha of Caldenmere carried, that was supposed to burn to gold when the fated mate was found and acknowledged. I had carried it for 12 years, dormant, silver, unremarkable. In 12 years it had never flickered. I had half concluded in the private space where I allowed myself private conclusions, that it was not going to. That I was one of those alphas for whom the mate bond was a theoretical rather than a practical reality, and that I would govern alone, which was fine, which was completely fine, which I had made my peace with. The mark went gold. not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. The silver lines on my wrist filled with light, warm, amber gold light, the color of a candle seen through ice, steady and unmistakable. And I felt the pull in my chest sharpen into something that was not a pull at all anymore but a knowledge. The clean and absolute knowledge of a fact you have always known without ever being told it. The kind of knowledge that does not feel like discovery, but like remembering. She was already looking at her own wrist. The mark was there on her wrist too, silver lines I had never seen before because she had always had them concealed beneath her working wrap, and they were gold. The same gold, the same light, steady and clear and undeniable in the amber of the palm lamp. Our eyes met across the straw, across the wolf who was still pressing his head against her chest with his eyes closed in perfect contentment, and neither of us said anything. There was nothing to say. The mark said it. Werk said it. The bond said it, warm and complete in my chest in a way it had not been since midsummer, restored and full and certain. She looked down at the mark on her wrist for a long time. Then she looked up at me and said, very quietly, "I didn't know." "No," I said, "neither did I." "Is that," she stopped, started again, "that is the mate mark?" "Yes," I said. She was quiet. Werk exhaled against her chest, a long, satisfied sound. She kept her hands on either side of his face as though she needed the anchor of him while she thought. I understood. I was having the same need, and was managing it by not moving. "You were going to send me away," she said. "Not an accusation, just locating the sequence of events." "I was considering it," I said, "before I saw you with him." "And now," she said. I looked at the mark on my wrist, burning steady gold in the lamplight. I looked at her, the pine resin smell of her and the herb paste on her wrist, and the open, unguarded look still on her face from the moment Werk had stood, all her composure set down, nothing performed, just the genuine person there in the straw. "Now," I said, "I have a question, a different one than the one I came in here to ask." She waited. This was something I had noticed about her. She never rushed toward an answer or away from an unanswered question. She simply waited, with the quality of attention that good healers have, the kind that makes the person in front of you feel that what they are about to say is the thing being attended to most carefully in the world. "Will you stay?" I said. She looked at me for a long moment, at the mark on her wrist, at Werk whose head was still resting peacefully against her, at the mark again. Then she looked at me. "Yes," she said. Not because the mark required it, not because I was the king and the alternative was untenable, because she had considered carefully with the same precise attention she gave to everything, and had arrived at yes. I knew the difference. I had spent 12 years learning to tell the difference between compliance and consent, because a king who cannot tell the difference between those two things is not a king anyone ought to trust. "Good," I said. I crossed the straw and sat down beside her, which meant sitting beside Werk's great shoulder, and he moved slightly to accommodate me with the automatic ease of a creature who considered this arrangement entirely natural. And the three of us sat there in the lamplight while the bond warmth settled into something I had not known I was missing until this moment. Not the cold of its absence, not the managed warmth of a thing barely maintained, but the full and steady warmth of a thing complete. I did not make any grand speeches. I did not say anything that I would not be able to say again plainly and simply in the morning, which is my test for whether a thing is true or whether it is just late and quiet and lamplight doing work that daylight will undo. I said, "In the morning I'll need to bring you before the court." "Yes," she said. "It will be formal," I said. "There are protocols for this. A mate mark recognition before the court, the announcement, the sealing of the bond." "I know what it means," she said. "I'm a healer, I know the protocols." "You're not afraid," I said. "No," she said again in the same tone she had used before. "Should I be?" "No," I said, "never, not of anything while I am here." She looked at me. The lamplight was warm and the hold was quiet, and the wolf between us was breathing easily, finally, for the first time in 4 months. "You mean that?" she said. "Yes," I said, "I mean that." She nodded once, the small, precise nod, and then, with the total practicality that was, I was understanding, simply who she was, she said, "Then I'll finish the compress. The course is almost done. Another day and the fever should break completely." I looked at her. Something in my chest, not the bond, or not only the bond, did something that had no name I had been given, and that I did not try to name in that moment. "Finish the compress," I said. She turned back to Verk's shoulder. I stayed beside her in the straw. The lamp burned steady and the wolf breathed and the hold was quiet and warm. I brought her before the court the next morning. I sent the summons at first light, all court members, the senior pack officers, the hold keepers, the guild heads who held standing in the great hall. I did not tell them what the summons was for, which meant that by the time they gathered there was a particular charged quality to the hall, the alert and slightly apprehensive attentiveness of people who know that something significant is about to happen and are in the process of deciding how to respond. Senna came in through the main doors with the escort I had sent, in the same plain gray dress, her healer's mark visible on the wrist where the gold lines were still bright and distinct. She walked to the center of the hall and stopped and looked at me and waited, and the court looked at her with the assessment that courts give to unknown quantities, and I looked at her and felt the bond warmth steady and certain in my chest and stood up. "This is Senna of Ashfin Village," I said. My voice in the great hall carries without effort, which I have always been glad of. A king who has to shout loses something. She is a healer of the outer district, with no previous court standing. She has been treating Verk for 9 nights, using a field preparation that your chief healer has now verified and endorsed. Verk stood yesterday for the first time in 4 months. The hall was very quiet. Hareth was already looking at my wrist. I raised it. The gold lines were unmistakable in the morning light through the hall's high windows, steady, warm, the same amber gold as the lamplight in the wolf hold. The silence in the hall changed its quality. It went from the alert silence of people waiting for information to the deeper silence of people receiving information they are in the process of absorbing. "The mate mark acknowledged her last night in the wolf hold," I said. "The bond is complete. I am presenting her to this court in the formal recognition as the protocols require." I looked at Senna. She held my gaze across the hall, her chin level, her hands at her sides, the gold on her wrist catching the light. She was not performing anything. She was simply there, present and unhurried and entirely herself, in a way that I was beginning to understand was both the rarest thing I had encountered in 12 years of governance, and also, somehow, the most expected thing I had ever felt. Lord Fenwick was the first to bow. He had the outer district reports on his desk every morning, and he knew Ashfin, and I think he understood something about why the mate bond had found its way to a healer who worked the outer circuit, who came through a drainage grate at midnight because a wolf was crying and someone needed to answer. He bowed without hesitation, a deep bow, the formal bow of court acknowledgement. The senior pack officers followed, not one at a time but together, a ripple through the standing members of the court, heads dipping, backs straightening, the formal recognition moving through the hall the way a current moves through water, finding its own level. My chief healer bowed with something on his face that was both embarrassment and relief. The guild heads bowed. The hold keepers in the back of the hall bowed. Hareth bowed last. He was the kind of man who needed a moment to arrive at things, and he arrived and he bowed, and when he straightened there was something on his face that was not enthusiasm but was, at least, acceptance. I could work with acceptance. I crossed the hall to Senna. She did not look away when I walked toward her. She looked directly at me, with the same open attention that she had given me in the wolf hold when I asked her to stay, the full weight of her consideration, nothing withheld, nothing performed. I stopped in front of her. You came through a drainage grate, I said. Yes, she said. Because he was crying, I said. Yes, she said. That is, I stopped, found the plain and honest version of what I wanted to say, the one that would survive daylight. That is the kind of person the bond is supposed to find, I said. That's what the elders always said. Not the most powerful, not the most strategic. The one who hears what needs to be heard and goes toward it. She looked at me for a long moment. I didn't know it would be this, she said. She paused. He needed someone. I know, I said, so did I. Her breath steadied. Something shifted in her face, and what I saw there was not surprise and was not performance and was not the careful management of an uncertain situation. It was simply the thing itself, the recognition arriving in her the way it had arrived in me, clean and clear, and without strategic dimension. I offered her my hand, the formal gesture, the palm up, the way the protocols described. She looked at it for a moment, then placed her hand in mine. The gold on both our wrists warmed simultaneously, a brief intensification of the light, there, and settled. The court was silent and bowing, and the morning light was coming through the high windows, and Verk, who had been brought up from the hold by the hold keepers on my instruction, who was walking, moving carefully but without the labored gait of a month ago, his shoulder held with the cautious dignity of a healing animal, stopped beside us in the center of the hall and sat down with the great deliberate gravity of a wolf who knew exactly what he was doing and considered his work complete. He had known before I did. He had been choosing her for 9 nights while I slept on a stone bench and listened through the granite. He had let her touch what he would not let anyone else touch, and he had pressed his head against her chest in the lamplight of the hold, and the mark had answered what he already knew. I looked at Senna. She was looking at Verk, and the smile was there, the full one, and it was the same smile she had given him in the wolf hold when he had stood, the genuine one, the one with nothing in front of it. He'll need the compress for 1 more day, she said, and then he'll be clear. I know, I said, you told me. I just want to make sure you remember, she said. He is the whole reason any of this is happening. He is, I said. I'm aware. He will be insufferable about it for the rest of his life. She looked at me, I looked at her. The court around us was still in the formal bow, and the morning was coming through the windows, and the wolf between us breathed easily and steadily, healed, whole. 1 more day, I said, then we discuss what comes after. Yes, she said. There will be a good deal to discuss, I said. The protocols, the court standing, the Oren, she said. I stopped. She had not used my name before. She said it the way she said everything, directly, without embellishment, with the plain attention of someone saying the exact thing they mean to say. Yes, I said. 1 thing at a time, she said. I looked at her. The bond warmth in my chest was steady and full, the fullest it had been in as long as I could remember, and the answer to everything that had been missing in the 4 months since midsummer was standing in front of me, holding my hand with herb paste still faintly visible on her wrist, looking at me with that plain and direct attention, asking me to slow down. 1 thing at a time, I agreed. Verk put his great head down on his forepaws and closed his eyes with the satisfaction of a creature whose work was done. I held Senna's hand in the morning light, in the great hall of Caldenmere, in front of the whole court, and felt the key settle into the lock and rest. The outer district had a healer I needed to replace. I would send 2. Ashfin village had given me something that no council appointment had ever found and no ceremony had ever produced, and I intended to be grateful for it for as long as I governed, which I hoped would be a very long time. Not because she was the bond, though she was. Not because the mark demanded it, though it had spoken as clearly as any relic in the kingdom's history, but because she had come through a drainage grate at midnight, for a wolf who was crying, because someone needed to answer, because she was exactly the same person at 3 in the morning in the straw as she was in the great hall in the morning light. Because she had explained the bog myrtle compound to my chief healer without condescension, and had sent back a note that said only I'll come this afternoon, and had asked me, in the wolf hold, should I be afraid, and had taken my answer and believed it. That is not a small thing to believe an answer. It is, in fact, everything. She looked up at me, with the wolf between us breathing easy and the court around us still, and the morning settling over Caldenmere the way mornings settle, without asking permission, without announcement, simply arriving and filling the space. "Come," I said quietly, not to the court but to her. "I'll show you the rest of the whole of it in daylight, not just the east corner." "The east corner is where you were hiding," she said. "I was not hiding," I said. "I was waiting." "In the dark," she said, "in full armor." "Strategically positioned," I said. Her mouth curved fully, the real smile, warm and direct and giving nothing away that wasn't genuinely there. "Show me the rest," she said. I kept her hand in mine and we walked out of the great hall together, and the court that had been full of whispers and careful silences for 4 months was, for a moment, simply quiet, not the quiet of worry or management or performed calm, but the quiet of a room where the thing that was wrong has been made right, and everyone present knows it. Verk walked with us to the hold's entrance and then stopped, with the particular dignity of a wolf who had decided his part in the proceeding was complete. He sat down in the doorway and watched us go, and the morning light was on his gray coat, and his shoulder was held without the old careful tightness, and the bond warmth in my chest was full and steady and home. I had spent 4 months afraid of what it meant when that warmth dimmed. I would spend the rest of my life learning what it meant when it did not, what it meant to be a king who had found the one who heard what needed to be heard, who came toward it without being asked, who knelt in the straw in the dark and answered. She had not come for me, she had come for him, and somehow that was the most certain proof of all.